Welcome to the first of hopefully many interviews and recordings done through the Naturopathic Collective. My name is Dr. Niki Young. I have been working as a naturopathic doctor in the supportive role for patients with cancer for over a decade. I am here with Dr. Analilia Valencia, another naturopathic doctor and friend of mine, who started out treating cancer patients as a residency with CTCA, and then went on to learn about indigenous botanical medicine, and who has studied the techniques of fasting through a center called True North in Santa Rosa. And today we are going to talk about some of the commonly asked questions and who can and cannot fast and the misconceptions involved with fasting. Dr. Valencia, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the studies that you have extracurricularly taken on since your formal education as a naturopathic doctor?
Thank you, Dr. Young. My name is Dr. Analilia Valencia. I'm currently working at Sage Clinic. And just like Dr. Young was saying, she actually taught me a lot about integrative oncology when I was doing my residency. I went ahead and wanted to learn more about water fasting, and that's where I went to True North Health, and I was an intern there and did some extensive learning and wrote an article after leaving about water fasting. I'm really excited to present this information to your audience.
Thank you. Really happy that we have maintained our friendship over the years because of the different lives that we have led to learn about certain things. And one of the things I've always loved about you and encourage you to do is this, just taking that chance to go study something somewhere and learn as much as you can. So you spending a year and a half learning about the water fasting, or they didn't just water fast there, they did juice fasting and restrictive diets. And then more so, the focus was also on being cared for and taking the time to rest and heal.
Yes, that's a big component with True North is they want people to rest and heal. And do some light activities. That's either through yoga, stretching, a little bit of getting some sun exposure during the daytime, but a lot of it is just like resting and allowing the body to heal. So it's very, very exciting. And they've been around for at least 20, 30 years. So they're very familiar with fasting.
Yes, I remember Dr. Goldhammer coming to our clinic, not to clinic, to the school, and educating us on his facility and fasting. And that was almost 20 years ago. So yeah, they've been around for a while. Since you have finished that, and then you went on to Ecuador to learn about botanical medicine, and then now you're at your own clinic at Sage. Do you continue to utilize these practices that you've picked up along the way?
It might resonate with you, Dr. Young, regarding like you pick up and you kind of make what you learn and integrate it and create something that will benefit your patients. And that's probably like from fasting to when I went to Ecuador and my other internships and residencies. It's like, how do I integrate this and make it practical and so that patients can be healthy?
Dr. Valencia, can you explain the different types of fasting?
Before I do that, I'll say, so fasting by definition is the voluntary stopping of any calorically foods or beverages. So you're deciding not to eat or drink anything. So that's fasting. And then the different types of fasting that we're all familiar with, that's pretty popular right now. It's intermittent fasting. There's prolonged water fasting only. There's caloric restrictions, which includes like juice, broths. And then there's also fasting through religious reasons too. I'll touch a little bit about the intermittent fasting first. That is when you're deciding to reduce the amount of time you're going to be actively eating. The one that we're mostly familiar is the 16-8. So for 16 hours out of the day, that's including while you're sleeping too, you're going to not be eating. And then after the 16 hours, you have 8 hours for you to incorporate your meals within that time frame. So that's the intermittent fasting there. And then another example for that would be, they call it a 15-2, where most people eat food for 5 days out of the week, just their normal meal. And then the last 2 days, there have to be 2 consecutive days they decide to reduce their calories. So it's between 500 to 600 calories per day. So they're eating less during those 2 days. Those are usually the best forms to kind of start off with when you're kind of trying to see if fasting might be something that you want to do because of some of the benefits that we'll discuss later. And then at True North, like you were saying, we mostly did prolonged water only fasting. Usually you had to be a candidate for that. And if you weren't a candidate, that's when you could either do juice or a modified fast where you have like a salad with some soups. So it just caters to the person's health status and what their goal was too.
It's a good point, tailored to the patient's health status. What kind of things are you looking for that determines whether a person can safely fast and what type of fast they can do?
That's a very important question. As a clinician, you have to see what's the best outcome for the patient, because they come in mind and wanting to water fast, but they're not clinically able to. So things that you look at is their health. Like, are they taking lots of pharmaceutical medications? Like, are they taking medicines for their diabetes, their high blood pressure, or antidepressants, or even anti-seizure medication? Some of those you can't abruptly stop those. So that's where you would have to wean and work with a provider to help you with that. Obviously, something called BMI, the body mass index. So that's how much roughly reserved of fat that you have in your body. So if somebody's 17% or less, then they're not a candidate for fasting just because of the reserves. They don't have as much, and it could potentially be harmful for them. Also, we're looking at the muscle percentages that they have, their physical activity, their state of health. Those are things that we're looking at. And people that are absolutely not allowed to fast would be obviously a pregnant person, somebody that's breastfeeding, that could help milk production, a type 1 diabetic, or somebody that has anemia, like a really bad anemia, they wouldn't do that, or any kind of a really severe kidney or liver disease, because when you're fasting, those are the organs that are really reliable. And somebody with a severe arrhythmia too, so any heart condition that's really bad.
So somebody that is already malnourished or in a state of disease progression of a cancer, like in cancer where they become cachexic, that's usually an inflammatory state as well, and not necessarily calorie deprivation. So say somebody was working with an educated provider on calorie restriction. In that case, what was nutrition dense but calorie restricted, they would not be a candidate for the full water fasting.
Yes, you're correct, Dr. Young. Somebody that is, because of the inflammatory stage of the cancer, they're losing a lot of weight and they're not going to be candidates for water fasting. So that's when it's looking into other, nutritionally dense foods that still provide some of the calories, but also that they could restrict it, either intermittent fasting or do a little mild caloric restriction during certain key points so they can maximize their outcomes would be ideal for them. And I think that's where you would probably have more experience on me. It's with the ketogenic diet, potentially. I call it clean keto, not the dirty keto, because you want to maximize all those nutritionally dense foods of phytochemicals. Yeah.
Keto is more than just avocado and bacon on everything.
Yeah, and eggs and dairy.
Yes. This sounds amazing, but back to the cancer patients, say they were newly diagnosed and they're just starting on their journey. We know that means they can be anywhere from being very robust to being, very much in distress. But let's say someone in the middle of the road didn't know that they had cancer, that wouldn't think anything was wrong with them. They're generally, everything is, was going along fine. They went in for a routine exam and found out. And now they're going to go on to the conventional therapies. Could they be fasting during and before and after surgery, during their chemotherapy or radiation? I have my takes on some of that too, but what was stressed about that in the experiences that you've where you learned? if a patient was about to undergo surgery, would they be able to do fasting? I know they say to fast, but nowadays I don't know if you've seen this, but they've been giving this very calorie dense, glucose dense drink for patients prior to surgery because it helps them recover faster. And we have our theories on to why this is, but I don't know if you have seen that in your patient population.
So we kind of looking at the person, if they're overall healthy and they're healing and they're not having any kind of problems with their healing response. Usually I tell people, have a lot of foods with vitamin C, zinc, iron, selenium, and healthy proteins that are not inflammatory before and after, just to help you with your healing. And if they are having problems, then considering doing IV therapies for that. I haven't thought about fasting before surgery, but we know usually when people undergo surgery, their surgeon tells them not to at least eat 24 hours before they perform an operation. And that's more to avoid, them having any vomiting while they're in anesthesia, or potential other things that could bodily fluids come out when when you eat, right? Once you put things in your mouth, they're coming out the other way. So you're trying to avoid that mess.
Yeah, especially under anesthesia when you have lost all the controls of the body.
Exactly.
You're in their hands. As far as the chemotherapies and nowadays immunotherapies, do you see fasting as something that can be helpful, or could it make things worse for the patients recovering from their chemotherapy?
I believe that's where Dr. Longo, his work came about, where he did some research on, it was animal models, I believe. They were trying to do also human studies on fasting before doing chemotherapy. And what they are seeing is less side effects while doing chemotherapy. So that could be a potential things for the younger, person that just got diagnosed or initial stage, fairly healthy, wants to try to do as much as outcomes for their disease prognosis and reduce the side effects is fasting. So usually it's, fasting a day or two before they're getting their chemotherapy, day of chemotherapy, and if they can, a couple more days after. And I had a couple of people doing that, and a lot of their nurses and oncologists were very surprised to see that they had really minimal side effects.
I have seen and heard that from my patients as well, that they refuse the cookies and the sugary drinks while they're in there. And they try telling everybody. And of course, they get met with the wide-eyed, like you're crazy type of information from other well-meaning practitioners in their treatment centers and the patients that they meet, right? That would also depend, that timing of fasting with the chemotherapy would depend on whether, if they're on a weekly schedule,
Yes.
then doing 2 days before, 1 day of, 1 day after, that is a long time, then to do it again the next week, right?
Yes.
So that's where we would probably focus more on that intermittent fasting, and probably, day of and day after.
Yes. And that's where also I like you were saying, that intermittent fasting or the day of or day after, they could also do caloric restrictions, right? And I think that's where Dr. Longo's work comes from, where you're still getting the autophagy and some of that cellular repair, even at 500 to 600 calories per day. So again, like if patients can't fast because they're cachectic or other reasons, maybe they could at least try to reduce some of their calories for at least the day of or the day before.
Yeah, I have a little coffee drink that I've shared my recipe with my patients, because it involves putting something like MCT oil or avocado oil or coconut oil or ghee or grass-fed butter. One of those fats, healthy fat, in with my coffee, some usually like ribose or something that's not a caloric sweetener, and then using, other herbs and things, cinnamon or turmeric or something like that, kind of making it a nice little special thing. And that has actually helped me personally with my intermittent fasting. That's my breakfast, but it's not really breaking my fast so much, because there's not a lot of calories there, and it's not carbohydrate calories. So it's not getting that insulin up.
Yes.
And so with that insulin, without that insulin going up, I'm not having that sugar go down, my blood sugar go down, because the insulin's putting that sugar into my cells. Right. So,
Exactly.
and so, I'm not getting that crash at later afterwards in the mid-afternoon or more mid-morning even. I remember oatmeal's healthy. That's like eat healthy growing up in the 90s. And I'm like falling asleep by my second period. So what are we doing in here?
Yeah.
It's something that has actually changed my life significantly. And thankfully right now, I don't have cancer that I know of. And it's something that, in my perspective, and do you agree that it can be something that is used even before you have a serious illness?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important to, like, back to what you said. I'm no longer seeing cancer patients, but back to what I learned from, True North water fasting is what's the best way overall any American could do for themselves is to do some type of fasting, either intermittent fasting, juice fats, or, bone broth or any kind of vegetable broth fasting, because unfortunately, Dr. Young, that we are just over consuming calories, and that's causing a lot of chronic diseases in our world. And even if you're not that person that has diabetes or high blood pressure and you're overall healthy, it's just, there's so many good studies showing that fasting can help you. And the word term I use was autophagy, which is just a fancy way of saying cellular breakdown. So even though we're healthy, we still have cells that are old and, not optimally running, but they're just still not quite have gotten broken down or degraded. And then by fasting, we add that stress in our body that allows those cells to be recycled in their components. So to answer your question, yes, yes, yes.
One reason why in major, religious groups, every one of the three major Abrahamic religions involves some sort of fasting, and I'm pretty sure all the other major religions, indigenous cultures, and they have some sort of ritual around fasting. I've always felt that it was a more of a ritual type thing that was geared for our spiritual guidance, or making us slow down and contemplate life and that enjoy or appreciate. But it also does have that physiological benefit to it. And part of the religious leaders' jobs in history's past was to partake knowledge to the congregation about knowledge that, how to live a better life. And that meant not just with their heart and their mind, but also in their physical being. And so have different food cultures, food preparation, kosher and halal, and all these ways that food is prepared to basically make sure that it is healthy for us and that it doesn't cause disease in the people that partake in it. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot of people doing the fasting as for use as biohacking, right? The nootropic brain biohacking, people that are, limitless, want to just go, 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 go. And that goes against everything I have been taught or experienced with fasting as being something that is more in that ritual, religious, spiritual realm of slowing down and taking inventory of your life or your surroundings, or what direction you want to go in next, or appreciating, that sort of thing. Do you feel like that fasting is getting getting a negative reputation because it is being misused this way, and so people are having ill side effects from it? And do you think that it has a place in that triathlete nootropic brain biohacking space?
That's what we really don't know, right? The long-term consequence of these like biohackers of what they're doing. So yes, like sometimes they're like, oh, I haven't eaten in 5 days and I'm gonna lift 400 pounds. So it's like, okay, and it depends on the content, right? They're relatively healthy, but if it was somebody that had cancer or wants diabetes or high blood pressure or an autoimmune condition, like them trying to lift those 400 pounds is actually going to be detrimental for them. Because so when you're fasting, I'll give you a little like overview segue, is the first a phase of fasting is when you stop eating. So 24 hours after you stop eating, most of your glycogen, which is a glucose storage, is formed in the liver. So that gets used up. And then after that, so within 2 days after 48 hours to 72 hours, that's when you start getting changes between your glucose in your blood and your fats, your ketones. So what that transition is happening, once you're in ketosis, so that's when you're predominantly burning fat as your fuel source. So this is going back to the weightlifter. So they're strictly in ketosis. And then by you lifting weights and doing other stuff, you're putting more demand on your body that requires glucose. So then you're going to start breaking into your skeletal, your proteins to try to make up for that glucose you're needing. So for that quick bodybuilder, biohacker, they do it that time or, they'll be fine. But again, we don't know what long-term is going to happen when they continue doing that. Versus somebody that is sick, that means those reservations or reserves are going, instead of it going to healing the body, it's now trying to go to try to make more glucose and removing that muscle skeletal protein, right? So we want that sick person to be like, okay, once you're fasting, when you're in ketosis, most of your cells are able to use the ketones as your fuel source, except for red blood cells, your liver, and your certain part of your kidneys. So they still need glucose. And that's why when you're fasting, we're like, okay, you could still do light activity because your body still makes a low level of glucose, enough to feed those organs. But anything above that, it can't keep up with that demand.
That process you were talking about, how the body makes glucose, you're speaking of gluconeogenesis.
Yes.
That process is where it is kind of reversing the taking the stuff that's in the molecules that are in storage, that's mostly the proteins, like you're saying, our skeletal muscle, and processing that through the liver to make glucose. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in that respect.
Yes.
And you're putting stress on the liver, which if you're somebody that is pretty thick into their disease state, the liver probably isn't very happy to begin with because it has to filter through everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you likely, I'm just making a patient example of somebody that has been going to their primary care doctor for decades, and they got hypertension, they've got diabetes or high cholesterol, or, any, those are metabolic, all three of them together is metabolic syndrome. So they're on a number of medications. Maybe they have medications for other things, thyroid, migraine, arthritis. These are all being processed through the liver already. And then you're going to put yourself into a state where you have to steal your proteins from your body to reverse engineer it into glucose through the liver, putting more stress on an organ that is working overtime. I feel like that is one of the most common things that occurs when we see the side effects, when we see someone say, oh, fasting is dangerous. That's usually the person that proves that point.
Exactly. They were the ones that were exercising. They were pushing their body, and their body wasn't able to keep up with their demand. And then another thing too, we didn't talk about was the refeeding too. So once they break their fast, like, are they continue doing all these extensive activities that are going to, be a high risk for them? Or are they gonna just do that one huge event? Like, let's go back to those weightlifters doing 400 pounds. Are they gonna break their fast like that day or the next day, that they're still able to try to get some glucose back in their body, right?
Someone in that case, the weightlifter it would be a good idea to have a personal trainer that is adept with that knowledge of touch on refeeding, on prepping into and coming out of a fast when it comes to their bodybuilding. I do the same thing with my patients of prepping them going into and out of fasts based on their condition with the cancer and where they're at with their chemotherapy. Outside of those two very specific populations, what's a general preparation of going into and coming out of a fast?
Normally recommend 2 days before they start fasting is eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, and that's just providing fiber to help the colon cleanse. And also you're reducing your calories during that time. So your body's going to get used to like, okay, I'm not going to eat as much. And then it also helps a little bit with your body starting to go towards the detox. For example, like if you were drinking coffees or teas, and then you're just going to fruit and veggies, then your body is like, right? So it's like, okay, let's prepare. We're kind of cleansing the body and just clearing things out. So mostly fruits and vegetables for 2 days. Do your fast. And then with the refeeding, I know that's where a lot of people kind of do anything and everything, but typically at True North, what I saw was that they normally break their fast with juices. So it's mostly the green juices, enough glucose in there so they could start breaking their ketosis. It all depends on how long they fasted. So you start with liquids, then you progress to, semi-solids. So that would be your vegetables or your fruits. Some people like raw. Some people I've seen steamed is better for them to break it. And then after that, you could go to grains, your legumes, and then your nuts and seeds. So kind of a stage of what you want to do.
And if you're a meat eater, that would be one of the first things you gave up and one of the last things you reintroduced.
Exactly. So meat eaters, yeah, they'll be definitely after, just because the proteins needed for you to break down those meats while you're fasting were reduced. And it's just you don't want it to sit in your gut and just ferment and get constipated and belly pain. So you want to
Sounds like a lot of fun.
No. So you want to, it's like you said, stop the meat first and then introduce it when you're refeeding last.
In that fast, where do supplements and medications play here? Somebody's on life-saving and life-continuing medications. Obviously, we don't want them to stop that. Yeah. But also, if they're on too many of those, then fasting completely, water fasting is probably not appropriate for them.
Yeah. Usually, again, it depends on what medications they are. So, for example, if they're on diabetic medications and their blood glucose is less than 200, then that's when the doctors start weaning them off their diabetic medications. And again, also blood pressure, if they're just eating the food, they monitor your blood pressure. And once they start getting lower and it's a safe number, then they'll start weaning the blood pressure medications off. So you could always wean. Some of the hard ones are the antidepressants are harder, obviously, just because of the withdrawal that they could have with that, even pain medications too. So yeah, it depends on the medication that the person's taking. But if it's one that, like you said, it's life savings, you don't want to stop it. So then that's when you would do more of that intermittent fasting. You're still having some calories, but not completely water, just because we don't know what happens when you're just taking that medication only with water and no other foods. What's the interactions? How is it going to affect your kidney, your liver, just because of you're not eating. And with supplements, the main thing, at least at True North, wasn't recommending when you're water fasting, you could potentially, and you're adding supplements, you could get nauseous. So that would be the biggest thing that we would see if people would try to add some things in there. And I guess you could say the purest of the purest, it's like just water and that's it, right? But if you're adding other things, you're not showing how the water's going to respond. If it's going to be like digestive upset, is it going to be heartburn, or is it going to be vomiting? So while you're fasting, ideally don't take any supplements. But I know a lot of people would always say like, well, why can't I take electrolytes? Right? Like while I'm fasting, like why only water? Can I have a little tea or a little broth? And to be honest, we just don't know by adding tea and broths, like how is that changing things? I know when you're only water fasting that your electrolytes do change, right? So sometimes your potassium and your sodium can go down. And that's why if you're going to water fast for a long period, your electrolytes to get monitored to make sure it's not too low or it could be bad for you.
That's a good point. So if you're doing anything, say longer than a day or two fast, definitely be working with a medical professional that can run labs and assess if you need to make any adjustments along the way.
Yes, I would agree. Before starting my internship, I thought, oh, most people could do 5 days, but some people, when you're water fasting specifically, it can bring up something that we didn't know was an underlying condition somebody had. So for example, there was a healthy woman that she was water fasting and it was about day 5 and she was starting to get stroke-like symptoms. And we're like, oh goodness, what's happening? So we're like, we stopped the fast. We did everything appropriately, got followed up, and doctors in the hospital was like, no, well, we don't find anything wrong. Why are you here? So right when she started to refeed, so there was something in her neurologic system that when her blood sugars were getting too low, she got almost stroke-like symptoms. But when she ate again, she was perfectly fine. So with that experience, I was like, okay. 5 days might be pushing it for. So yes. So like if you're going to do anything more than 2-3 days, see your doctor, have them do some labs and see how you're doing.
Make a plan.
Yes, absolutely.
Work with somebody that can say, this is what you could expect. This is, if this happens, here's how to troubleshoot it. And,
absolutely.
That sort of thing. Basically what I'm trying to say is, don't do this on your own.
Yeah, no, you need a plan. Definitely not alone. If you are like, tell somebody, hey, I'm going to fast.
Exactly.
Have somebody check up on you.
Harvard did a study where they found that up to 88% of the American population is not metabolically flexible.
No. Yeah.
What they meant by that is they are not able to actively switch from using glucose to using ketones throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So this is I get hangry when I don't eat for a couple hours. That's an indication that mitochondria may be damaged, might be stressed, might be from a disorder or from a disease process, a number of reasons. My question is, the person that says that they get hangry if they don't have something every 2 to 3 hours, are they a good candidate for fasting?
So we got to figure out why, right? Is it because they have adrenal insufficiency? Is it because of their insulin glucose? Or are they just, we want to make sure that they're not like a type 1 or 1.5 diabetic. So we got to kind of figure out what's going on with that. And if they were properly evaluated and they're like, okay, it's not your adrenals, you're not diabetic, then I would be like, okay, let's figure out, we got to get the mitochondrial flexibility happening. So we need to try to allow you to extend where you're not just relying on carbohydrates. So potentially it could be the insulin response, right? They're probably having too many carbohydrates, getting the insulin spike goes down so low that they're getting the shaky, the hangriness, and they have to re-eat carb heavy foods so that they could feel normal. So it's again like, okay, we got to look what are kind of healthy fats and proteins, because that should equalize that insulin response from spiking too much for them. I would definitely first have them eat food and kind of work on that, and then starting to do some kind of now let's see if we could fast and give your body that flexibility of I am able to go X period of time without eating, without feeling hangry or I'm gonna pass out.
Basically, you're start your training before the marathon.
Yes, exactly. Those people potentially is if they were to fast, they would just feel miserable. You know, they wouldn't be a good candidate for that purpose.
So that's a good topic to touch on, the what to expect when you're fasting. So what you had just mentioned, the people that would feel horrible fasting, the people that need some support with their metabolic flexibility, that would be on one end of the spectrum of what you can expect is going to be some unpleasant side effects. What can you expect to feel while you're fasting?
So when you're fasting, usually what you'll be feeling is the first day, just hungry. You're going to be hungry. So that's the biggest thing, is try to keep yourself occupied. So either, reading books, if you have hobbies like quilting or puzzles, keep yourself busy, drink lots of fluids. That helps a lot. Usually after like the hunger, some people may potentially just feel nauseous. Sometimes that just happens. Tired is a big component too. Because when you do start fasting, you do get an increase in cortisol. So that potentially you might feel restless and not able to sleep, especially at nighttime. And then you'll probably have naps more during the daytime. And some people, they could get some rashes. That's usually later in the fast that could happen, or a little bit of a heartburn. But predominantly, I would say nauseous, probably headaches, and some muscle discomforts like back pain.
So that sounds very pleasant. We touched on this earlier about the autophagy that's stimulated from fasting. It's something that only people like us would understand.
Yes.
That's the benefit of fasting. You're going to help eliminate cells that they're not quite damaged enough to start their own cell death sequence, but they're not healthy enough to be beneficial to us. So autophagy kind of pushes them in that direction of like, hey, time for you to go.
Yeah.
But that's a concept of that we don't physically feel or notice that's going on. So what is something that the average person will experience from fasting that motivates them to do this?
It doesn't happen to everybody, but some people I've had where they're like, oh my gosh, my like, this is the first time I don't have brain fog. Like I feel that I could think clearly, and I have this like burst of energy, and I'm not eating anything. So some people can have like the burst of energy or the clear thoughts. And another thing that could happen is they're just very calm. So they're not stressed. So they
Never
get
eating again.
right. Well, they get into that parasympathetic like state, their heart rate reduces, their pulse goes down. So they're kind of very like relaxing. They're not going to notice, but they can see is neuroplasticity. So that's your brain is starting to repair itself and create new avenues and highways. So things that weren't quite running are starting to run a little bit better. One thing that we don't always talk about, and it's that you do start losing weight, but it's not for weight purposes that you should fast. It's because of the other things that are predominantly you're trying to do. We talked about low blood pressure could happen. Also people that have arthritis, less stiffness, less pain. That's something that they could see. And if they're tracking their insulin levels and their sugar levels, they'll see a reduction of that too.
I can see now the appeal to the biohackers for that neuroplasticity, the pruning and growing of new cells and forming of new neural tracts. Obviously there's going to be weight loss with calorie restriction, that sort of thing. Also the lowering of inflammation, you were saying, with the arthritic processes. But also, that's also going to tie into the water that is stored, that inflammation. So as that inflammation goes down, you're going to be releasing a lot of stored water, that weight that most people experience, that big drop of weight with any diet change. And that's usually the reason. Not be used for weight loss. It should be used more for these other methods, these other reasons, the lowering of the inflammation so that people are in less pain and able to move about and enjoy their lives a little bit better. Helping with the mental, emotional states and cognitive function. We can, sit here and talk all day long about all the benefits of doing it, but in the terms that we talk about things, doesn't translate well to the grocery checkout aisle magazines, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you were saying, Dr. Young, it's important that they're doing it for the health benefits. Like, okay, I want to reduce my blood sugars or my cholesterol, my blood pressure. Those are the reasons, because just like you said, the initial weight loss is water that you'll lose, and you can lose some fat while fasting, but ultimately, it's what you do after the fast. Like Dr. Goldhammer would say, fasting is just a quick way to get healthy, or, to get relatively healthy, but to maintain it is what's the food that you're putting in your body, right?
The big facet of the education that we do with our patients here is that, yeah, we can do all of these things and help you with your success, be more successful in your journey through, cancer and recovery. But if we don't have a plan for after that, if you go back to the way things were, where you're going to end up back here again.
Yeah.
So it is a reset or a great way to reevaluate and have that time to make that plan for how life's going to be after that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's important. It's like you're saying, you have to have the plan, not only the food, but also the community, right? The mental, emotional work that you have to put into it too. And the exercise or movement, all those, as you're aware, Dr. Young, are so important on your prognosis for fighting cancer.
Don't you wish that everybody had access to a naturopathic doctor?
Yes, absolutely.
Tooting our own horn there.
Main thing that I would say, every person's different when you're fasting, right? Just because what happened to you or what happens to me when we fast is very different. It all is individually based, as far as it's all reflective on what's your health, what's your disease process, again, your reserves, meaning how much fat, protein that you have, or in the form of protein, muscle mass that you have, our metabolism. So, depending how much inflammation we have in our body, and the oxidative stress and toxins in our body, all that can reflect on how we fast and how we respond to fasting. So just because you might be somebody that's super ill, not to get discouraged fasting, just, you might have to start slow.
I mean, sometimes we need training wheels and the bumper rails at the bowling alley.
Yeah, they're there for a purpose.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah, you can't just, dive right into the deep end sometimes and expect us to be, a triathlon swimmer. You have to figure out where you are at and work with somebody to help guide you, because, as I like to say, the doctor that treats themselves has a fool for a patient. So you cannot be subjective and objective at the same time. So it's really a good idea to work with somebody that can be that objective part, but it's also very important to pay attention and talk about yourself subjectively to that person that is supporting you, so that both those perspectives can be taken into account when modifying the plan.
Absolutely. You can't resuscitate yourself or you're passed out.
Just all the things that we as doctors, and especially naturopathic and integrative doctors, and we have all the cool toys in our offices, and we're trying to do something to ourselves after hours. Let's just plan a play date with your friend,
Exactly.
and treat each other in that respect.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Valencia.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Young. It was a pleasure.
I think we covered everything. I hope we have some good information that make this not as intimidating or scary or just off-putting, as you know, a lot of times something that becomes a fad turns into this, you have to do it this way, this is the only way, or if you can't do that, then you shouldn't even try at all. There's many ways to get the benefits of fasting.
Yes.
Just work with someone like Dr. Valencia.
Or you.
Really appreciate the time you spent with me today, and always love talking with you. And whenever I get a chance to hang out with you, is always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Same. Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Yes.